Thank you for joining us on today's Renewed Minds. This edition is brought to you by Christmas Food Baskets, a ministry of the Faithful Adult Life Group, which leads a church-wide effort to assist families during the Christmas season who are experiencing food insecurities and don't receive help from any agency or group. Over 100 families of various sizes receive basic food needs during this time of year. Contact Church on Main at office@churchonmain.church for more details. In today's podcast, we'll be discussing challenges and opportunities that we all face, no matter the season of life we're in. Each episode will offer practical tips that we've learned over the years and also share how love and grace can help each of us while we're trying to maintain hope. Today in the studio, we have Tommy McDearest, Senior Pastor of Church on Main in Blacksburg, Virginia. Tanya Dinkle, owner and coach of Life in Action. Today's topic is Together in Peace, handling holiday family drama. The holiday season is the time for joy, wonder, laughter, and hope, right? Enjoying the get-together of the family and friends may mean dealing with drama and conflict, which may be normal, but it does not have to ruin important occasions and relationships.
My family's always perfect. We never have any conflict
Of course
or
you
difficulties.
are. Of course you are. Of course you are.
Everything's always going well anytime we're in the same room.
I can picture your family's faces as they're listening to this right now. So my family is not perfect, so I'm going to give everybody the permission to not be perfect and not have to stand up to the Tommy McDearest
If anybody
level.
believes that, once again, I have swampland that's been available in Arizona.
So, I mean, in reality, the holidays there's this, I guess, a Norman Rockwell ideal that a lot of people maybe strive to, which is the picturesque, everything's perfect. Meals come off without any sort of drama or issue. The turkey's always perfectly golden and done just right, never burnt. The mashed potatoes are fluffy and the green beans are perfectly seasoned and the rolls are great, right? And everybody's happy, everybody's on time, nobody's obnoxious. And that's just not the reality.
It's just not how it is.
I don't think it was that way even in Norman Rockwell's time, to be honest.
I don't either. I think he enjoyed thinking it and wanting it to be perfect like that.
Yeah.
I come from a family of really good cooks, so the food is usually really good when we all get together. But, there can be tension. There's not always. There can be tension among everybody that's there around various things, and sometimes it's something that's a little bigger than others, and sometimes it's not.
And sometimes it's not the entire group. Sometimes it is what the individual people are living in that moment, whether it is a personal trial, something within society that is happening. I mean, it could be any number of things that it's, one or two people in a group. It doesn't have to be the whole group.
No, a family that has one member of the family that routinely deals with emotional illness, basically, is what it is. And whenever the family gets together, they know that that's going to be a stressor because they have to, this young man does not deal well with crowds, but he always wants to be there. It's, if he said, I don't want to be there, I can't deal with it, but he always wants to be there because he loves everybody that's there.
Yeah.
But it's a huge stressor for all of them when they get together
including
for the
him.
holidays, including him.
Yeah.
And he's keenly aware that people are not always comfortable with him, and it's just always a stress. And, it is the one person that always, creates that difficulty, but he doesn't mean to. So everybody adjusts to it and keeps going on. But sometimes it's very different from that. It's not one person with a mental illness. It's
well, I mean, it could be differing personalities just that don't necessarily mesh well. It could be old family issues, things that haven't been talked about. I know it's been amazing to me over my adult life learning pieces of family history on both sides of my family that were just never discussed because in the time you didn't.
Yeah. You didn't talk.
You just didn't talk about things that were inappropriate, deemed inappropriate, or awkward, or uncomfortable, or any of those things. There could also be sensitive topics. Some of that could be political at this point, considering the season that we are just coming out of. But it could be other health-related sensitive subjects. Mental health could be considered a sensitive topic for some folks, especially those that are uncomfortable navigating that arena either because of personal experience or because they just haven't had experience in that space. And then even balancing expectations. If you go in with a certain expectation that may not be quite appropriate for that setting.
Yeah, that's true.
You might have some anxiety or some additional stress coming in.
And what we just said just a few minutes ago, everything's supposed to be perfect, and it rarely turns out to be that way. Yeah. There's going to be those things, and when it doesn't turn out to be perfect, the anxiety can start to grow. Yeah. And when it does, it's going to create more and more problems if we don't step into it and say, oh, wait a minute, let's not let it get out of hand.
Yeah. So why don't we start with giving everybody permission to not be perfect, to not expect a perfect holiday season.
And your holiday season will probably go better and will be happier in the long run if you don't expect that from the start.
Yeah, exactly.
You're dealing with human beings. They may be your family, the people that you love dearly, but you know as well as the rest of us do that there's going to be those times when it's going to get stressful, and you just have to try to figure out how you're going to go through it, get through this.
Yeah.
So it's okay to not be perfect.
Yeah. So let's talk about how we get through it. So I think the first thing that is helpful for people to understand and remember is that knowing and understanding your own triggers is going to be an important way for you to start to set your own boundaries.
And you have to realize that everybody else in the family is going to have a trigger too. And so you're going to have to adjust around those triggers, whatever they're going to be.
Because everybody's are different.
That's right. Everybody has something different. It's along those lines. You need to learn to listen to each other as carefully as you can. And if you know what the triggers are, try to avoid some of them.
Yeah, and you can even talk about that ahead of time. I've talked in the past about setting boundaries with family members and being very open with the boundary that I'm setting to say, going forward, this is what I'm not going to engage in. You can do something very similar, saying, okay, we are coming to this event, but this is an area that I'm just not going to talk about at this point. And that could be if you've had a recent job loss or if a relationship has ended badly or something like that. Those are two common ones that people don't really want to talk much about. So setting the expectation, especially if you've got a family member who likes to know what's going on and likes to ask questions, and we'll say that's out of genuine care and concern, setting that boundary ahead of time to say, I'm just not in a place to talk about it is absolutely appropriate.
We need, especially in this day when politics is such a hot topic, you're going to be with family members that may be very different from you. They may have very different views. Set the boundary ahead of time. We're not going to talk about politics. We'll talk about family. We'll talk about friends. We'll talk about jobs. We're not going to talk about politics. I had a cousin that I dearly loved and enjoyed being with him, but he was always liked to bait people. He wanted to get into that political discussion, and we had to just say to him, "We're not going to talk about this.
Yeah.
You can keep trying to debate it, and this is not what we're going to talk about."
Yeah.
And he would usually then settle, stop. He would stop better from my mother when she just told him, "This is how it's just stop. Don't do that again."
I imagine your mother was very firm.
I'm leaving out a little piece of the story of how she told him that we were not going to talk about this.
I think we can imagine, right?
But she had a very firm way of saying that. I've heard all of that. I want to hear.
Yeah. So I will just say, if you are concerned specifically around political discussions, we did do an episode about politics and religion in 2024. That's an earlier episode. You can go back into the show episodes, and you can find that. I think it's episode 2 or 3 that we did. Yeah. So you can take a look at that. And there are some tips in there about how to navigate some of those conversations. You can also set limits on where you're going to go and how much time you're going to be there. Now, this is particularly easy if you've got a full calendar and you're hitting multiple events in the same day or the same weekend. But even if you're not, you can still set those boundaries to say, it is only healthy for me to spend X amount of time with this group of people, and then even set a timer if you need to do that.
Yeah, it's perfectly acceptable to just try to figure that out ahead of time so that it doesn't become an argument or it doesn't become difficulty with everybody in the family.
Yep.
In our family right now, we've got a lot of little children, and so setting a time frame usually is around when they give out and when they start to wear out and it's time to go home.
Yep.
But for everybody else, you may really need to just say, I can only give this amount of time to it, or it's going to drive me crazy if I do more than that.
And if it's a situation where you just can't do it, you know that the anxiety, the frustration, the negative thoughts, the negative feelings that you're having about even thinking about going to the event, if you're having those and you feel that it would be better for you emotionally, physically, mentally to just skip it. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
You can totally skip it. Now, I would encourage you to own that if you're doing it, right? To explain why. That is very much a comfort level thing that not everybody is comfortable with, especially if you're new at setting boundaries. But it is an important part of the boundary setting process, and that is owning the boundaries that you're setting and the why behind it. In order to do that, you have to tell the people what you're doing.
And usually, if you tell people why, they will either understand it and accept it, or they will accept it grudgingly. But if you explain it to them and say why, they may not like it, but they still understand this is the why and this is the boundary.
Right.
And therefore, there's no reason to get upset. You knew this in advance.
Right.
We've already discussed this.
Exactly. So these are all things that you do yourself before you even have a conversation with anyone, right? But then you actually have to implement the boundary, which is oftentimes harder than deciding what the boundary is going to be.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So making sure that people understand ahead of time where you stand is going to be important. So how can you have proactive, respectful conversations with people? Understand that making eye contact when you're having these conversations, this means not texting everything. We're in a text world right now, right? Where I'm not coming because you hurt my feelings and this is what you said and I don't want to be around you. It may be perfectly accurate and definitely communicate setting a boundary.
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does. If you have the ability to have that conversation face to face, or be able to have, if you go and then you're setting the boundary when you get there, you can have that conversation face to face. That can also be powerful in your own enforcement of your boundaries.
And chances are pretty good that this is not always true, but chances are pretty good that you're going to be more civil to each other face to face than you are. One of the downsides of any form of social media is it's given permission to people to say things to folks they're not looking at that they would never say to their face.
Yeah.
And it is hurtful, and it is divisive, and it's ended friendships and so forth. So if you've got something really hard to say, try to think of a way to actually say it to each other. And if you're going to write it, and then go back and read it, and then go back and read it again. Maybe let someone else read it and say, how would you respond if you received this text or this email?
Yeah.
Letter writing can be very helpful, and it can make a big difference in things, provided that you're careful about what you say.
Yeah.
We need to take care of each other if we can, and take care of each other's feelings.
Yeah. So. Yeah, while being open and upfront and honest about our own. So body language is also an important part of the messaging. And honestly, that can be stating what your boundary is very firmly, making good eye contact, and then when that boundary is about to be breached, turning around and walking away.
Yeah, just leave.
Just not engage. That's a very clear sign that you are not going to engage in that conversation if you literally exit that conversation. Yeah. That's perfectly appropriate.
My wife is even better than I am in saying and in doing that. But she'll just finally say, "We need to stop. We're not going to talk about this. If you're going to talk about this, then I'm going to walk away. I'm going to leave."
Yeah,
and she does.
Yeah.
That's just how it is.
Yeah. So, Tommy, you talked just a minute ago about we need to be kind, and we need to care in our language. So being direct and kind is the next thing that in the messaging that we do, we want to make sure that we're doing. So how do we do that? Using clear and concise words.
Absolutely.
Honestly, fewer words are better. It's less for you to try to remember if you're one of those types of people who likes to rehearse what they're going to say. And I can personally relate to that. I know that totally shocks you.
I'm amazed. I just can't even fathom that.
Then it's just less for you to remember in the anxiety of the moment when you're actually trying to deliver that message. So really short messages is helpful. Saying I versus you. So I feel I'm going to versus you are causing me to do this.
You are causing me stress.
Yes,
well,
you are causing me stress.
You immediately have a division right there.
Yeah, right.
I am feeling it, kind of takes it a little different.
Yeah, it makes it personal for you, not personal against them. So, and then avoid using overly negative or strong words. That just tends to increase the emotion in an already emotionally charged situation. Most likely
die,
emotionally
you
charged.
scum-sucking pig.
That
usually will not make.
Generally not the best way to go at these.
Probably is not going to make the situation better.
Yeah, it's also probably not going to help with active listening, which is the next piece to remember. But it's important, if you're going to engage in a dialogue, if it is a very direct boundary setting conversation where you say, I am not going to do this, and the other person is very clear that they're not going to let you not do that, and you turn around and walk away, conversation's done. If there's actual dialogue around this and they're trying to understand why you feel that way and you feel comfortable sharing that, right? That's the other piece of this. Then engaging in active listening is helpful because you might actually get to a point of resolution to the whatever the core issue is that is causing the anxiety to begin with. So
and it might even improve the relationship.
It could,
if you're actively listening and taking seriously what's being said, and not get defensive about it.
Right
now, sometimes it's hard not to get defensive.
Oh, absolutely.
Die, you scum-sucking pig is probably going to bring out a defensive reaction.
Wow.
So think about the words that you're choosing.
Before you use them.
Before you use them, yes.
Yeah. So active listening is eye contact, really, truly not listening to respond, but listening to understand. So that means as soon as the person stops talking, you're not prepared with your rebuttal, right? You are processing what they've said, and then you're formulating your response, which means there might be some quiet spaces between the statements, and that's okay. People are uncomfortable with quiet space, but it's actually really helpful.
It can be extremely helpful, but do understand, people are not always comfortable with quiet. So if you become quiet, somebody may say, are you not going to say anything?
That's true.
And you need to be willing to say, give me just a minute. I'm processing what you've just said.
Yeah.
I don't want to say the wrong thing here.
Right. And if you find a situation going sideways, because that can happen when you've got one that is trying to process and another that is uncomfortable with silence, again, making the choice in that moment to end the conversation and disengage is entirely appropriate.
It is. Sometimes the very best thing you can do is disengage.
Yeah, absolutely.
You may save a relationship. It may keep it from becoming more heated.
Yep.
And the last thing you really want is for things to become more heated, because that's when things can get out of hand when that happens.
Yeah. And get out of hand in a lot of different ways.
Yes,
so
it really can.
So some other things that you can do is planning breaks for your self-care. So depending on how long these events are. So I've been blessed that I've always lived relatively close to family. So it's been, I used to call it around the world. So depending on where I lived in the state, I was traveling mainly a day or two, but I was bouncing from place to place. So I never got more than a block of hours with any particular group. But some people go travel further distances, and they'll have days or even maybe a couple of weeks with a group of people that can cause some anxiety producing situations as well. So depending on your scenario, what your self-care might look like is going to be a little bit different through these seasons.
And ask yourself that question. What would my self-care look like?
Yep.
And that way you can kind of plan
what
that's going to, how you're going to work with other people in that.
So if you're talking about a relatively short event, that could be, we talked earlier about setting how much time you're going to be there ahead of time. Set a timer on your watch. Oh, time to go. I've got somewhere else I need to be. And that might be at home on your couch in your pajamas with your TV. That is totally fine. There is no shame there. If it's a longer event, maybe if it's days or weeks long, then maybe you've got things planned where, I've got a massage, or I'm going to go on a hike, or I'm going to go look at Christmas lights, or, and you're doing that by yourself or with someone or a group of people that you do feel safe and comfortable with. And go ahead and plan those things out at intervals that you need, so that it gives you that self-care that you need as you're going through that period of time with your family.
And try to work at being both available to the people that are around you, while at the same time protecting yourself in that. You do have to plan those kind of things out. But sometimes a need just arises that you hadn't expected.
Sure.
You're dealing with a family member, and all of a sudden they burst out and say, it's looking like we're going to get a divorce, or somebody was just diagnosed with something terrible in their lives, or I was just, well, everything changes at that point. If you can't shift and change to help that person, then you got something going on with you too.
Yeah.
So think that through. But most of the time, those are not going to be the things that are going to be happening. It's just things that you have to plan out and set the boundaries around it, and decide how you're going to go forward with that.
Yeah. I think in the people that I've coached through boundary setting, most, and you tell me, Tommy, if this has been true in your experience as well, a lot of the anxiety around going into situations like this is not the people, it's not the activities, it's the conversations that they either know are going to happen, but most often anticipate or fear. And I say that because they don't always happen. But in their heads, they're already there that this conversation is going to take place, and they're building anxiety around preparing for those conversations. Do you find that too? True?
Absolutely. It is so often that I have those exact kind of things that they're dreading. This is going to come up. I know it's going to come up. And I don't know how for it not to come up. I don't know how to avoid it, and I'm already nervous about it.
So let's talk about some ways, give some strategies for helping with that. So first of all, you should always know that you can pivot away from those conversations. So we talked earlier about difficult messaging and difficult conversations, and walking away, disengaging if you need to. You can absolutely do that. You can also change the subject. Some people do that through humor, making a joke or taking a break in conversation and just changing the subject. Or speaking of that, it actually isn't speaking about that. It's something completely different, right? It's like, how did we get there? Just go with it, right? So there are lots of different ways that you can detour the conversation, and that really is based on the person and their style, their personal style.
And the speaking of that mentality, that's a good tool to use, because it doesn't matter what you bring up after that. Usually, most people think it's speaking of that.
Yeah.
It's somehow related.
Yeah.
So it gives you an opportunity to pivot.
Yeah. You can also be very clear in saying, I'm just not going to talk about that.
That was going to be my next statement is, if the pivot doesn't work, then just very clearly say, I don't want to talk about what you were about to raise here.
Yeah.
You know that it's going to cause a problem. Let's just leave that alone.
Yeah.
And then if they insist on not leaving that alone, feel free to walk away from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feel free to go home, do whatever it is that
go
you
in the next room, do
need
something.
to do.
Do something different.
To move away from it so that you're not in that. Now, they may get angry. But that's
on them.
That's on them.
Yeah.
You're going to have to let them deal with their own feelings around that.
Yeah. Yeah. So know that we are each responsible for our own feelings and behaviors, especially for our behaviors, how we treat ourselves and each other through all of this. And your responsibility is taking care of yourself in these situations, and being kind and compassionate in what you say and how you treat other people and your loved ones.
You need to take care of your family too.
Do.
Sometimes the conflict may revolve around some member of your family that someone else has decided they don't like, or they don't appreciate, or whatever else. You are responsible for taking care of those that are yours.
Yeah.
And so walk away from it if you need to.
So another thing we've talked about is active listening, but with that goes empathy. We all just want to feel heard at the end of the day, right? It doesn't matter what the conflict is. We just want to know that someone heard us. And in many cases, we were talking earlier about the societal need for everyone to agree with me, right? And that, I think that is absolutely a thing right now. But even more core than that, everyone has always had the need to just be heard. Even if you don't agree, just listen to what I have to say.
And do exactly that. Listen carefully to what someone has to say, and then decide how you're going to react to it. But keep that empathy piece in mind while you're doing it. Is most of the time people are saying what they need to say because they need you to at least care about their feelings and what's going on in it. And, sometimes you can, and sometimes what they're saying is just wrong, and you don't, you have to decide what those are. I mean, if they're if they're trashing another group of people just because they're another group of people, you don't have to affirm that in any way. That's going to be wrong. But most of the time, that's not going to be what the family is arguing about.
Yeah, and empathy can be really powerful. And I want to be really clear and break this down for just a minute, because I don't think everybody understands truly what empathy actually means. So sympathy is putting yourself in the person's shoes and saying, I've been there.
Yeah.
Right? I know what you're going through. Empathy is saying, I'm standing beside you. I've not been in your shoes, but I can kind of sort of imagine what you're going through. Right? Two very different messages.
And I care about that you're hurting, whether I understand what's causing it or not.
Right.
It matters to me.
Yeah. So when you think about using empathy in these conversations, when you're having a disagreement with someone, words like, I understand your perspective, however mine is different, is absolutely appropriate.
No, and there's not, and there are situations where there's nothing else to do.
Absolutely,
but just say that. I understand why you feel the way you feel. I just don't agree.
Don't agree with you. Yeah.
I'm not where you are on that subject. We're probably not going to get there.
Yeah, it's the classic agree to disagree, and if the other person simply refuses to let that be, again, disengaging from the entire conversation is completely appropriate.
That was back to my cousin that I was talking about earlier. He could not bring himself to let it go sometimes. So either someone had to step in, which was usually my mother, and saying, you have to stop this, and we're not going to do this anymore, or it was just walking away from it and letting him. I've actually seen him in situations where everybody walked away and he was still standing there talking to himself. But you had to let him do that.
He was passionate about the message.
He was passionate about it. What we all had to remember, though, is he was a great guy.
Yeah.
He cared about his family. He cared about the people that were around him. He'd do anything in this world for you. Yeah. He just had some really strong beliefs about a few things, and he wanted everybody else to have them.
Yeah.
And so you sometimes had to let him stand in the yard and talk to himself.
Some good fresh air. So another thing that you can do, we've talked about it earlier too, is using humor to diffuse. Now, Tommy McDearest is a huge fan of humor.
I don't ever recall doing that. I've never experienced that.
Yes,
before.
never experienced that. And with a straight face every time. Light humor can break the ice in situations. It can also help you in pivoting into a different type of conversation. I had a dear friend and former colleague who was probably one of the biggest movie aficionados I've ever met. He would throw out movie references like nobody. And I've never been that much into movies, right? So he would throw out a reference. And now my husband would probably have gotten every single one of them because he also loves the movies. But totally lost on me. But it was a great way for him to connect with people, but also to pivot into something different. So it's that, speaking of, let's go talk about this over here. And so if you are gifted in that, unlike me, then that could be a way that you can kind of tap into that and break some tension, change the subject, at least break tension. because you've got some humor kicking in.
My dad was one of those people that he had an opinion on everything, and he didn't hesitate to tell everybody what it was. When I got to be an adult, I would, make a joke or something like that to kind of, slow everything down. And then I would call him and say, Dad, I need you to help me with something. And he'd come in. I'd say, what I need you to help me with is don't talk about that anymore. Nobody wants to hear that. Yeah. They're all trying to change the subject, and you keep going back to it. Leave it alone. And, he would always get frustrated, but he would usually do what you said do when he realized they'd stepped across the line somewhere there.
So that actually ties into the next one, which is know your audience. Mm-hmm. So sarcasm is also a friend of yours. If our listeners don't know that, I know you don't really see that, but Steve, can you confirm that yes, sarcasm?
I think he uses that tool very well in multiple situations.
Very well said. Very well said. Okay, so but you do need to know your audience.
I was choosing your words wisely there. That was
very much so. So, but you do have to know your audience and who you can say what to. And when you choose the wrong message with the wrong audience, it could actually make a situation a lot worse. Or even if normally that sarcasm with that person could land very well, if they're not in the right space for that, like you need to be aware before you actually say something.
And I know this will be a shock to you, but I've actually experienced that of saying something that usually would not bother someone at all,
shocked.
And all of a sudden it did. I know that's hard for you to believe.
Yes, I know it is. At some point, video might be interesting for these podcasts, so people could see just how shocked I am by that comment. Okay, so let's talk about navigating family dynamics, because I mentioned earlier that I have been really, and we'll say enlightened, to understand some of our family's history and things that just were never talked about, and we won't even get into all of those things, but understanding that there are certain family roles and managing those. So, who plays what role? Who's the peacekeeper? Who's the rule maker? Who's the reasonable person in the group? And sometimes you can kind of, in knowing and understanding what those roles are and who's going to play what role, it can help you kind of anticipate and maybe even plan some things and how you're going to set, communicate, and execute boundaries.
In our family, my daughter is usually the peacemaker. She usually is the one. She uses humor like that. She
gets that from you, I think.
The gift of sarcasm. She has, but she can play that off very well. Mm-hmm. And if her brothers are starting to butt heads or something else going on, she sometimes can just step into that. But she's also got a little bit of her mother and her grandmother in her that she can just walk into it and say, "Okay, stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's enough." And it does usually work very well coming from her. Yeah. If I walked in and said the same thing, then people get mad. But she can do that. She has an ability for that.
Yeah, and bless her for leaning into that.
And if you have a family member who is good at that, let them play that role. Yeah. Don't hesitate to do that.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then breaking the cycle of old conflicts. Back in the 40s and 50s, very common for things just to be swept under the rug and not talked about. And some family dynamics still practice that.
I was going to say, it wasn't just in the 40s and 50s.
It wasn't. But I guess for me, I struggle a little bit.
It was more prevalent, I think, then, but it wasn't just then.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think for me, as I've been reflecting within our family dynamic in the last several years, is I know that things were happening in that era and things weren't talked about. And now the quote unquote leaders, the elders of our family they're thankfully still here, but I wonder how much of the way that things still aren't talked about, things aren't addressed, conflicts are not addressed. It's just, I don't like you, but I'm not going to tell you that I don't like you, and I'm not going to tell you why I don't like you. I'm just not going to engage with you. Like, that's behavior. So is that because of the history that's there? That's what they saw and that's what they've learned.
Oh, probably.
I think so. But it's not healthy.
No, it does not make it at all healthy. It's just it's what the learned behavior was. Yeah. And we all have those learned behaviors.
We absolutely do. Mm-hmm. But it's also okay to come in and say, we don't want to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. Right? So, we as a family are going to move forward handling conflicts in a different way. Might be uncomfortable for some, might be hard because it does require some hard conversations sometimes. And not all of those are in groups.
It is going to cause it inevitably is going to cause some stress because you're telling people, what you're basically saying to them is the way we've handled this in the past wasn't healthy.
Yeah.
We're going to choose a different path to do this.
Yeah.
I have talked about before that I revealed a big family secret, in one of a devotional that I wrote about my grandmother and her having an affair and my dad being a reaction to that. Well, I was amazed at how many in the family didn't know anything about that at all. And then were kind of, they weren't miffed, but they were just uncomfortable that it had become, it made a whole lot of things in the family make sense. But nobody had talked about it for 100 years.
Yeah.
So it was time to talk. It was time to get it at least on the table, whether anybody wanted to talk about it or not.
Well,
I wanted to talk about it, and it affected my family, so I put it on the table.
Well, and it's a problem that a lot of families face right now. So to understand that this is not a new phenomenon that happens, right? This has happened for 100 years. And this is not the only family, right? Like it's not unfortunately an uncommon. There's more commonalities among families than I think people realize. They just think that the problems and the challenges are just within theirs, but they're everywhere.
My mother had an aunt that committed suicide back in the 20s, maybe even a little further back, at least then. And everybody knew it, and it was something that nobody actually hid, but nobody actually talked about why.
Yeah.
What caused this? What triggered all of this? And what effect did it have on the people that were around them? Because it was right there in their house.
Yeah.
They just didn't. We're going to handle this by not talking about it.
Right.
I pastored a church in Atlanta it was started as a dysfunctional church. It was a breakaway from another church. They had 40-something years of dysfunction, but they didn't want to talk about it at all. And so they kept playing out that cycle of dysfunction. I think the only success that I had in that church in 3 years was convincing them to bring in an intentional interim pastor with an expertise in community expertise in dealing with the dynamics of dysfunction. And he made them face, some struggles they had there. And the next pastor that came in had 25 years of good ministry because they finally surfaced the things that were out there that was causing the problems.
Yeah, if you can't...
It was still my fault, of course.
Well, that sounds reasonable.
But it was. But they did finally talk about it. They needed... It was the church is supposed to be a family of faith. Right. The family wouldn't talk about the problems that were out there. And so when they finally had to...
you can't deal with them.
That's right. You couldn't deal with the problems that were truly before you.
Yeah. So then you talked just a minute ago, too, about, we're going to start handling... We've handled it this way. Now we're going to handle it in a healthy way. So that's really flipping to handling things in a more positive way, having more positive interactions. Now, that doesn't mean, just to be clear, that there's never conflict, there's never issues, there's never disagreements. There still will be, because we've got personalities, a lot of personalities that come into this family dynamic. We are not always going to get along.
And when you don't get along, you own that and talk about it. But you can plan for happy.
You can.
You really can plan we're going to get together. We're going to have a good time. Yep. These are the boundaries. These are the things we're not going to talk about. But these are the things that we have to talk about at some time. How are we going to plan for happy?
And you can also plan to do activities that can pull together some of the commonality that people will enjoy, and go do those and start to build on that. And maybe even build some new traditions. In
our family, it's sports, baseball, it's soccer, those kind of things. You go and you can go to a game, and it just seems like a whole lot of other things just kind of melt away when you go and you do that. Yep. Everybody's having fun.
Yep.
There's more than that, but there's, usually they just, ask me, and I tell them what's the right thing to do.
Yeah, that sounds normal. Sarcasm at its finest, guys.
Everyone in my family is laughing right now.
All right. So just to recap really quickly. So planning ahead, kind of planning what your boundaries are going to be, how you're going to communicate those boundaries, and how you are going to hold firm in those boundaries. And I'm telling you, seriously, setting an alarm on your watch or your phone is absolutely not inappropriate at all. You can totally do that. It holds you accountable. And if you find that you are actually having a better time than expected, it is not uncomfortable, and you want to stay longer, reset the alarm, add another hour, whatever the case may be. We can always hope and pray that, we are going into situations that are going to be better than we expect. Planning for that self-care. During, if it's an extended time, or after the family time, so that you can decompress. And again, whether that is a massage, it's a walk, it's just cuddling up on the television with the dog, or cuddling up on the couch watching television with the dog, whatever that is, it's okay. It's self-care time for you. And then taking what you learn from these experiences and carrying that into future experiences.
Absolutely.
Everyone's going to be a little bit different as you continue to evolve in this new boundary set space. So they're not all experiences are not going to be like that one after you said, these are my boundaries. You will find that your boundaries shift a little bit as you get more comfortable in that space and as your family understands your boundaries in that space.
You said something just a minute ago that's important. It is, you said hope and pray. Pray about it before you go in.
Absolutely.
And don't just pray that Uncle Ralph's going to change.
Yeah.
Pray that we're going to be able to figure out how to deal with the situation with Uncle Ralph.
Yep.
And then set your timer.
Yeah.
If you know going in you can only deal with Uncle Ralph about 90 minutes, don't stay 3 hours.
Yeah.
Stay with Uncle Ralph for 90 minutes.
Absolutely.
Or 20 minutes, whatever the time frame is.
Whatever it is. Yeah. And then gratitude and joy. I mean, that is the season that we're going into right now, right? Is being grateful and then being joyous for so many reasons. And I think even as hard as this season can be for people based on what life has thrown them, either very recently or over the last year or even over an entire lifetime, there are always things that you can find if you just take a minute, get quiet, and reflect. There are always things to be grateful for and be joyful for, and sometimes that is the fact that you are still here.
That's right. And don't hesitate to make that list of great things you're grateful for. By writing it down and looking at it, it can turn your situation completely around.
Absolutely.
It's not going to make whatever's hurting you go away, but it still reminds you that you have something to be thankful for.
Yeah. Any other words of wisdom, Reverend McDearest?
Have a good holiday season.
Absolutely.
Try to plan now for how that is going to play out in your life so that you can enjoy it and be part of the rest of your family that's out there. And if you've lost something recently and you're needing help or you're needing our prayers, write us and tell us.
Please.
And we will try to respond to that the best way that we can in a way that will help you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, with that, we thank you for investing your time in our message today. We are truly grateful for you. If you found today's episode to be helpful, please like and subscribe to the podcast and share it with others. If you'd like to join the conversation or if you would like prayer or to engage with us, we would love to hear from you. So please email us at renewedminds@churchonmain.church. And we hope that you make it a great day and approach every day with a renewed mind.
Hopefully this brings a renewed perspective to the challenges and opportunities you're facing today. What steps are you going to be taking to show love and grace to everyone? If you have any questions or comments about our podcast, please send an email to renewedminds@churchonmain.church. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us. Listen next week for the next Renewed Minds.